The moment the first reports began to surface, many people around the world dismissed them as rumors. Social media was already flooded with misinformation, exaggerated claims, and wishful thinking. But within hours, those whispers turned into verified footage, official statements, and undeniable proof. The world stood still as one sentence echoed across newsrooms, governments, and global capitals. Ukraine has reclaimed Crimea. What once seemed impossible, unthinkable, even dangerous to imagine had suddenly become reality. The shock was not limited to Moscow or Kiev alone. It spread across continents, shaking alliances, rewriting strategic calculations, and redefining the future of one of the most contested regions on Earth. For more than a decade, Crimea symbolized a frozen conflict, a geopolitical wound that never healed. Since 2014, the peninsula had remained under Russian control, heavily militarized, politically sensitive, and strategically invaluable. Many experts believed Crimea was untouchable, protected by layered defenses, naval power, and nuclear deterrence. Even Ukraine's closest allies quietly assumed that while territories in eastern Ukraine might change hands, Crimea would remain beyond reach. That assumption shaped years of diplomacy, military planning, and global expectations, until it collapsed in a single, world-shaking moment. To understand why this moment matters so deeply, one must go back to the origins of the conflict. Crimea has always been more than land. It represents history, identity, access to the Black Sea, and national pride for both Ukraine and Russia. When Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, it was a bold move that stunned the international community. Sanctions followed, condemnations were issued, but the situation solidified into an uneasy status quo. Crimea became the symbol of Russia's red line, a territory many believed Moscow would defend at any cost. Ukraine, however, never accepted the loss. Officially, legally, and emotionally, Crimea remained Ukrainian. For years, Ukrainian leaders repeated the same promise: Crimea will return. To some, it sounded like political rhetoric. To others, a distant dream. But behind the scenes, Ukraine was transforming. Its military doctrine evolved, its intelligence networks expanded, and its alliances deepened. The war that erupted on a larger scale years later accelerated this transformation. Ukraine became battle-hardened, adaptive, and increasingly confident. The operation that led to the retaking of Crimea was not sudden. It was the result of months, possibly years, of preparation. Analysts now believe it combined intelligence warfare, cyber operations, psychological pressure, precision strikes, and coordinated ground maneuvers. Unlike previous battles, this was not just about force. It was about timing, deception, and exploiting weaknesses that few believed existed. Russian defenses, once thought impenetrable, showed cracks under sustained pressure. Supply lines were disrupted, command structures strained, and morale tested. As Ukrainian forces advanced, confusion spread. Russian officials issued contradictory statements. Some denied any retreat, others blamed regrouping. While state media struggled to control the narrative, meanwhile, videos emerged showing Ukrainian flags raised in strategic locations, civilians celebrating, and Russian troops withdrawing. The images carried enormous symbolic power. They were not just military victories. They were moments of history being rewritten in real time. The reaction from global leaders was immediate and intense. Western capitals expressed cautious confirmation, followed by statements of support for Ukraine's sovereignty. Some governments urged restraint, fearing escalation, while others called the moment a turning point in modern European history. Financial markets reacted nervously, energy prices fluctuated, and defense analysts rushed to reassess long-held assumptions. If Crimea could fall back into Ukrainian hands, then nothing in the conflict was fixed anymore. Inside Ukraine, emotions overflowed. For millions of Ukrainians, Crimea was not an abstract geopolitical issue. It was home, memory, and identity. Families separated for years saw hope of reunion. Crimean Tatars, many of whom faced repression under Russian rule, viewed the moment as long-awaited justice. Streets across Ukrainian cities filled with celebrations, prayers, and tears. The sense of disbelief slowly transformed into pride and resolve. In Russia, the reaction was starkly different. Silence dominated official channels at first. When statements did emerge, they were defensive and carefully worded. The loss of Crimea struck at the core of Russian national narrative. It was more than a military setback. It was a psychological blow. For years, Crimea had been portrayed as a historic correction, a symbol of restored strength. Losing it challenged that image and raised uncomfortable questions within Russian society. Military experts quickly began debating what went wrong. Some pointed to overconfidence, others to stretched resources, and many to Ukraine's growing technological edge. Drones, satellite intelligence, and precision weapons changed the nature of warfare. Traditional defenses no longer guaranteed safety. The Crimean episode became a case study in modern conflict, showing how adaptability could overcome size and firepower. Beyond the battlefield, the implications were enormous. Control of Crimea alters the balance of power in the Black Sea. Naval access, trade routes, and regional security dynamics shifted overnight. Countries bordering the Black Sea recalculated their strategies. NATO faced new opportunities and new risks. Diplomatic channels buzzed with emergency consultations and strategic planning sessions. The retaking of Crimea also reshaped the conversation about international law. For years, skeptics argued that territorial integrity was an outdated concept, easily overridden by force. Ukraine's success challenged that cynicism. It sent a powerful message that occupation is not permanent, and that persistence, combined with international support, can restore sovereignty. For nations facing similar threats, the moment carried hope. Yet, the victory also came with serious concerns. Many feared escalation. Would Russia respond with greater force? Would the conflict widen? Would civilians pay the price? These questions loomed heavily over celebrations. Ukrainian leadership emphasized responsibility and protection of civilians, aware that victory without stability would be hollow. The international community urged restraint, de-escalation, and renewed diplomatic efforts, even as realities on the ground had fundamentally changed. For ordinary people around the world, the story resonated on a human level. It was about resilience, patience, and the long arc of struggle. It challenged the belief that powerful actors always get their way. It reminded viewers that history is not static, and that moments once labeled impossible can arrive suddenly, reshaping everything. Media coverage intensified, with analysts dissecting every detail. Some called it the most significant territorial reversal of the conflict. Others compared it to historic military turnarounds that altered the course of wars. Social media amplified emotions from celebration to outrage, from hope to fear. Hashtags trended globally, and the phrase "Ukraine reclaims Crimea" became one of the most searched topics worldwide. As days passed, more details emerged. Infrastructure assessments, security operations, and humanitarian efforts began. Ukraine faced the immense task of reintegrating Crimea, rebuilding trust, restoring services, and ensuring long term stability. Victory was only the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with challenges as complex as the battle itself. The international response evolved from shock to adaptation. Policies were reviewed, alliances reinforced, and strategies updated. What had once been a frozen assumption was now a living reality. Diplomats spoke of new frameworks for peace, while defense planners acknowledged that modern warfare had entered a new phase. Looking back, this moment will likely be remembered as more than a military event. It was a psychological rupture in global thinking. It proved that narratives imposed by force can be undone. It reminded the world that persistence matters, that time does not always favor the occupier, and that history remains open to change. For Ukraine, reclaiming Crimea was not just about territory. It was about dignity, sovereignty, and survival. For the world, it was a lesson in humility and unpredictability. And for history, it was a reminder that even the most entrenched realities can collapse when confronted by determination, strategy, and belief. The moment that shocked the world was not just the raising of a flag or the retreat of troops. It was the realization that the future is never fully written, and that even in the darkest conflicts, unexpected chapters can still emerge.